My name is Rebecca Cunningham. I'm a social scientist working in the Institute for Sustainable Futures. For the last 4 years I've been working in climate change. It has been wonderful, terrifying, amazing, overwhelming, and weirdly rewarding despite the existential crises, yes, plural. So this presentation is exploring humans, climate change data and ethics. Climate change information is all around us, some explicit, some tacit. This symbiotic and fragile relationship we have with this planet is transferred through the air we breathe, the water we drink, the buildings we live in and places we go to play. However, for the majority of the time this information is conveyed for many in dense and abstract forms, and there are often a lot of graphs. Got global emissions from fossil fuels and cement, or G20 countries' annual CO2 emissions per capita over time. The impact of CO2 actually has been keenly examined, as we know, in the Arctic region, as temperatures, having been measured for decades, are increasing at an alarming rate. We know that this warming in the Arctic region means melting tundra, which equates to sea level rise. What this might mean for countries most exposed from sea level rise is indeed devastating, putting millions of people at risk. And this is within the 2 degrees of warming that was agreed upon in Paris in 2015. There are numerous efforts looking at carbon budgets, the most famous of course coming from the IPCC. However, all of this data, all this information is what we have known for a quarter of a century. This data is often paired with familiar images, often painting a bleak picture for the future of our planet. However, I'm often left wondering, where are the humans? As a social scientist in 2014, I was working in India performing a social network analysis to understand best knowledge dissemination channels for a new seasonal climate forecast. This was aimed at the agricultural industry, as rainfall patterns are changing and crops are often failing. I sat with a group of farmers and they told me they can't plant paddy, rice, anymore. At least, not the way they used to. They used songs, handed down from generation to generation, to follow the seasons for planting and harvesting. These songs don't work anymore. What almost broke my heart was that one farmer, a leader of their community, spoke about the cultural significance of rice. They need paddy for community events, births, deaths, marriages. His mother had recently died, and the crop had failed, and he had no paddy, no rice to take to the funeral. His pain was felt by everyone in that room. Climate change isn't something that happens to other people in other places. It is happening to us here and now. More recently, earlier this year, I had the privilege to travel to Kiribati, a remote series of coral atolls in the Pacific. Along with another researcher from the Institute for Sustainable Futures, we were mapping the knowledge networks around water salinity and use. Kiribati has one of the highest rates of childhood morbidity due to poor drinking water. In Kiribati, the land is too salty to grow food, the fish stocks are declining, and on the outer islands, people are more likely to find out the water was bad once they were already sick. Although the project was successful, more needs to be done. Not in 30 years or by 2100, but now. People are dying. Sea level rise is an everyday reality. And every morning we had our coffee, gazing out on the sea that was literally at our doorstep. It was a constant reminder of that urgency. For these people, climate change isn't abstract. This is very, very real. The children that I saw playing by the beachside near the Menembes, the gathering house, they are paying such a high price for our lack of action. And how is that ethical? Kevin Anderson, who was in Kyoto in the 90s, provided this quote from a meeting of the Institute of the International and European Affairs. We knew everything we needed to know about climate change in regards to mitigation in 1990. 25 years, a quarter of a century of complete and utter failure to address climate change, and I think we need to remind ourselves how abject that failure we have presided over has actually been. Mitigation hasn't and isn't happening fast enough. The 2-degree COP target still exists, and countries have agreed to attempt to meet this target. However, our emissions continue to increase, and the models for future climate change indicate 4 degrees of temperature rise is now likely. and the impacts of which are just beyond devastating. So what can we do alongside mitigation? Adaptation, which is making changes to the way we live which allow us to survive until society learns to effectively reduce carbon emissions. And it is local, contextual, and happening. We can make changes now, both in the country and in the city. And we've seen it for years. Adaptation at a local scale, for example, the solar panel. It is an adaptation but with a mitigating effect. Here in Australia and New South Wales, we are very conscious of heat. This is a surface temperature map of Leichhardt on a hot summer day. The areas that are purple, deep purple, are urban heat islands. Some of the cooler yellow shaded areas on the edges are coastal, but not all of them. You can see cooler areas even within the built environment. In particular, the bottom right hand corner of the image is the coolest suburb in this local government authority. Why? Because it has retained substantial levels of tree canopy cover. Sounds simple, but why aren't we doing it everywhere? Heat has an impact on human health and well-being, but also on infrastructure and energy systems, as we need to use energy to cool our environment. As a society, we have the ability to design for anticipated change. This is an example of a change model developed for energy systems here in Sydney. An attempt to move away from business as usual by following a series of transition pathways to a designed and desirable future. This is actually part of a broad-scale strategic planning exercise in collaboration with ISF, UTS, and the New South Wales State Government, during which the researchers have spoken to over 1,500 government decision makers covering over 91% of the state's local government areas. It's about making change local, contextual and achievable that can contribute to mitigation but also improves health, well-being and survival of local communities. Understanding the lived experience of people allows us to design pathway to a transformed future. The traditional scientific chasms and silos of knowledge don't engage publics at scale. We as a society, and as a scientific society, need to engage in conversations. Now more than ever, we've got the tools to engage industries and civil society in transitioning to adapt to climate change. Companies such as the Cross Dependency Initiative, or XDI Sydney, launched only last week here at UTS in the data arena, and they're working with state and local governments, research organisations like us at ISF, and industries to collaboratively adapt our essential infrastructure to climate change, bringing together large-scale data. It's approaching like a petabyte of locally scaled climate change data, using immersive technologies to understand risk. Back in 2016, I worked with the University of Manchester and the Manchester Museum. We collaborated with the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change scientists on an exhibition called Climate Control. It was open to all ages, and the exhibit encouraged thousands through their doors. We presented climate data in artistic forms, such as performances and films, working in particular with artist Rachel Parry from Nottingham and Exist from Australia. We even did cooking shows looking at food of the future. We also worked with the Manchester City Council and the Climate Change Agency in order to engage civil society in imagining a city through play, Lego. And each of these buildings were annotated and offered to the City Council to inform their planning to reduce their emissions to net zero by 2030-2050. They created green buildings, transformed education, energy, transport systems, and even the working environment. At UTS, here at the Institute for Sustainable Futures, we're working with creative studios such as Blue Trot, based in LA, exploring virtual reality, allowing people to experience environments like coral reefs adapting in Belize, allowing people to interact with the science that is informing this transformation in an immersive environment like never before. You may have been wondering this whole time, well, this is a TEDx talk, so where's the speaker? Oh, like billions around the planet, without action on climate change, I will no longer exist. We have the tools. It is up to us to act. Hopefully by now, you will have in your hand a small pebble. And I'll leave you with this quote. I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples. And I ask you, take this small pebble and create ripples that will create a better world. Thank you.